Can you tell us about how you became a doctor and what life is?
Yeah, sure. It's a long story, really. I don't know really where to begin. Um, it's going to sound a bit ridiculous, but I didn't know what to do out of school. Um, it was kind of the easy option, like going into a medical career. I didn't entirely know what I wanted to do, but I knew it was a stable career path, which was good. Um, and I was into my biology and chemistry anyway, and of course, like I generally like helping people.
Mhm.
Um, so those kind of things push me towards picking medicine. So yeah, I just applied and got in. So then did 6 years of med school and qualified. Uh, what was it? 19, June 19,
Mhm.
and then just been working since then. So yeah, I mean, typical doctor's journey really. I had a bit of a hiccup at university, which we won't go into.
Mhm.
But yeah, I mean, it was a good time. Life we started. This is another massive. I don't know how long we've got on this today, but
Mhm.
um, I I had that hiccup that I just mentioned at university was not a fantastic time for me.
Mm.
And one of my friends from school ended up killing himself down in Bristol.
Mhm.
So then, with those two things, essentially, I was kicked out of university incorrectly.
Mhm.
I was in
Mhm.
my final year. I was just about to start my um, pre-placement year before starting my job as a doctor, and I was in Mongolia at the time, completing another part of the course. So in Mongolia, we were staying in this place called Torrells, which is a national park, and there was no. We had a horse to transport. We didn't have cars. We didn't have electricity. Some days there wasn't water, depending on how much rainfall there was.
Mm.
So getting your exam results there, it was so dodgy. I was hotspotting off somebody else's SIM card, which just had signal, and got my exam results through. Anyway, I found out that I'd failed one of my practical exams. So I was like, how's this happened? Because that was always typically my strongest part of the examination is my practical side. So I passed all my theories and what's called the OSCE. I've been told that I'd failed, and I was like, this is very, very strange. I didn't expect this.
Mm.
So I was going through the feedback, and I just didn't agree with any of it. I was like, I know, for example, there was a prescribing station where I had to prescribe certain drugs, and the breakdown of what I did was something I've never done before. I was like,
Mhm.
I know that I've never prescribed like that before. So it was very bizarre. Anyway, I appealed this process, but I was kicked out of university, and I appealed this process. Cut a very long story short, I had about 9 months. I got back from Mongolia, then I had about
Mhm.
9 months of not being at university. So everything I
Right.
understood about my own life was kind of like thrown up in the air. I thought I was on this stable trajectory that we talked about before.
Mm.
Um, and it wasn't. It was all thrown up in the air. So during that time, I had to try and put my life back in order in some way, and look after my own mental health. And I certainly noticed like a big decline in my own well-being. So then when I was trying to find things to help myself, there wasn't much really out there. It's like, well, are you clinically depressed? Maybe not, but I could be getting there. Or are you acutely suicidal? Well,
Mm.
no. So the services that you can access are either you have to be so far down the line
Mm.
before something is done about it. It's either mental health
Mm.
awareness, which sits way up here, or
Mhm.
you've got to be clinically
Yeah.
depressed, and there's nothing in between. So that was kind of the first thing that I noticed through my own kind of needs. Um, so that was a relatively crap time. And then one of my mates killed himself. Um, so then those things coupled together, I thought, I'm gonna have to try and do something about this, if
Mhm.
anything at all. So that was kind of where life started. It wasn't life then. It was just, I rang my school, my secondary school, and said, which is Bluecoat in Wavertree. I just said, you know, can I help your current student base look after their mental health and well-being? So they were like, yeah, sure. I'd got myself back into university at this time, and things in my life were relatively back on track. Luckily, the girl I was seeing at the time was training to be a
Mhm.
barrister, so she taught me how to represent myself, which was just very bizarre.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, we just started doing assemblies at school, and
Mm.
it kind of snowballed from there. They loved it. And then, I was doing one assembly, two assemblies, and then I was doing sessions for the teachers, which was, I was teaching my old teachers, which was again bizarre.
Yeah, strange.
Yeah. And then it just continued to snowball really.
Mm.
And then, it's taking up quite a lot of time
Mhm.
trying to move into the corporate space a little bit because there's massive corporate need for this kind of thing.
Mhm.
And everything that we talk about is underpinned by research too. So, there's lots of cowboys saying that, we're going to do a mindfulness session. And with all due respect for them, the heart's in the right place, but they don't have all of the
Yeah.
education which
Yeah.
needs to go with that field. Um, so yeah, there's a giant corporate need. So we started moving into that. And, I spoke to Toby, that Toby's the other co-founder of Lyfe, and
Mhm.
he's a doctor now too. But he's really into psychiatry and basically psychology, neurology.
Mhm.
So yeah, we just had discussions where we spent a long time sat over a dinner table discussing topics and, things that we could potentially do with our business, a potential business. And that's kind of where Lyfe began. It was called Sophron back then.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, we just looked at the corporate needs and just started really pushing into that. And then, our clinical roles ramped up a little bit, and it's hard to balance both of those
Mhm.
things. It's very labor intensive to do. Being a doctor is somewhat labor intensive anyway.
Mhm.
Trying to run a startup as well is crazy.
Yeah.
So we decided to try and build a piece of tech with the same kind of ethos, and yeah, basically improve the mental health and well-being of the population through this piece of tech. So
Mhm.
that's why we created Lyfe, to try and
Okay.
scale it more effectively.
So what kind of things can people do in life?
It's your one-stop shop for everything healthy, essentially.
Okay.
So there's 8 key categories. So the research that we mentioned earlier, it's underpinned by something called let me get it right, the biopsychosocial model for health.
Mhm.
That was created in 1978 by a guy called George Engel. He was an American clinical psychologist, and that's pretty much underpinned the last 45 years of medicine around how we holistically look after a patient. And it pertains to 3 key domains. You have your biological health, your social health, and your psychological health. So
Mhm.
biopsychosocial. But like that doesn't mean anything if you said it to
Mhm.
people like, what's my biological health? Um, so, a lot of research has stemmed from that. And a guy called Roger Walsh, I think it was in 2011, came up with the therapeutic life choices. And the therapeutic life choices all sit within this biopsychosocial model, but they're things which you can actually understand. So he created 8 key areas which complete your health, which is why our logo is an octagon, because it pertains to those 8 key areas. So that they're much easier to understand: fitness, diet and nutrition, building strong relationships, helping other people. There's 4 of the 8, and you can
Mhm.
clearly, it's almost like an instruction. Helping other people, you understand straight away what that is. um, so essentially within Lyfe, there are those 8 key categories, and it's an basically a geo-directory, a geolocated directory on your phone that you can see around you live how to do those 8 key things. And you get an exclusive discounts and offers to go and do these things.
Mhm.
Um, you can engage with content and videos from people posting videos about those things. You can shop products and services within those key themes. So it's essentially, we've looked at everything which contributes to
Mhm.
your well-being, and we've provided every single product and service within that by liaising with our partners. So it's kind of like a B2B and a B2C model.
Mhm.
We engage with the partners. We bring in those, we make sure that they're proper partners.
Yeah.
We have a list that we take them through. Um, Make sure that they're onboarded properly. They provide us products and services, discounts. They get their online space, if you like, on the
Mhm.
platform. They can push healthy things to our consumers, and that's kind of how the ecosystem works. So we're going through some testing of it now, Toby's in charge of testing the product, and yeah, it's just that's kind of where we're up to and how we're building it. So we've actually got a talk later today with the bid all around improving mental health and well-being in the workplace, specifically for corporate. So the theme is kind of, is it an individual or is it a corporate responsibility? So this kind of ties in with the school stuff, I suppose, because is it a teacher responsibility or is it the school's responsibility? So that's what the talk's on later today.
Yeah, it's going to be some really interesting discussions there, isn't there? Yeah. Oh, that sounds great. So how can teachers create a better work-life balance when there's high stakes accountability in a school?
It's difficult, isn't it? I don't know enough about a teacher's schedule to say exactly, but let me I'm guessing they come in at 8:30.
Yeah.
Come in at 8:30, leave around 5, 5:30, 6 if they're doing some marking, say. Would they ever be inside school outside of those hours typically?
Yeah, a lot of teachers do marking at home.
Do they? Okay.
Yeah. Lesson prep.
Okay. Do the school allocate time for that period? Like, do the school say to them, you need to do, this is a piece of work which must be done, so here's some time allocated to do that?
I'm not sure. Maybe some schools.
You'd like to think so.
You'd like to think, but I don't think. Maybe not.
So the whole work-life balance things, it's difficult. It's nice because they're not working shifts. If we're not shifting our schedule around massively, if you're doing nights or if you're doing a shift from 2 a.m. till midday, that's not a great time to be working for you, when the next day you might be working 8 till 5 and then the day after that. That's kind of what our rota looks like, and it's not great, to be honest.
No.
I sent you my rota this week.
Yeah.
Every day is just different. But if you are in a routine of, I get up at 6:30 in the morning and I go to bed at 10:30 at night, for example, that's quite a nice thing. So that's the first thing that you'd look at for sure, building a strong routine, scheduling, and trying to get into some kind of pattern. It regulates a lot of your hormones. It regulates a lot of, it's called your circadian rhythm. It regulates that. Around 3 to 4 weeks, you should be in a nice rhythm. And there might be little problems within that vein. Like you, for example, you might struggle with early morning brightness. So get yourself some blackout curtains, for example. There's going to be issues along that pathway, but surely the best step that we always take for helping people is actually setting that routine and schedule. So, my schedule, for example, is so hectic with shifts that I try and have like a routine for each block. So if I'm on nights, for example, I'll have a rough routine of what that looks like, and then I have a block in between the nights and then the days, because they give you 2 days off between the nights and days. So then the next 2 days I'll have a schedule for that to actually bridge that gap to get your sleep, try and get your sleep pattern back on today's. So I think the first thing as an individual, what you have to create a schedule and try and stick to it. If you don't have that, there's not much that we can do, to be honest, to help you. That is completely the individual's responsibility.
Yeah.
Of course, we can help you build that routine, but that's a really good base to start from. The reason I was asking those questions before around does the school allocate time to do those activities? There's quite clear evidence that people's stress levels go down if once they clock off from work, they actually clock off from work. That you don't want to go home at 6 o'clock and then be like, well, I've got potentially 4 or 5 hours more work to do here. And that time, you've already done a full day's work. That time in the evening, you need to be dedicating to potentially your family, your own health and well-being by going for a run, cooking dinners, meal prepping, relaxing, the general things in your life that you must do regularly to maintain your own health and well-being. So yeah, I would like to think that schools have something in place where they allocate, like a study time, say, for the teachers, is paid, it's part of their work package, and they can actually sit down and plan the classes, do some marking, because if that's a role within the job, then it's unfair to assume anything otherwise, and they should do that in their spare time. It doesn't seem fair to me, but hopefully that's not the case, and hopefully schools do mitigate that with proper workplace procedures. So and the other things that teachers can do this is a huge topic, but yeah, work on your routine, start your scheduling, generally focus on the 8 key areas. If you want to have a look at them, you're more than welcome to have a look at our website, and eventually download the app and we can help you with it. But yeah, it's honestly not rocket science. Lifestyle medicine's a rapidly growing field, arguably the fastest one in medicine, and it has very, very good outcomes for patients, because they might maintain a healthy life for another 10 years by living a healthy life, and the disease onset is just delayed. So their quality of life therefore improves massively. And we also like to think that the actual quality of life of the time that's lived is higher, because their overall well-being or psychological health during that period is also better. So yeah, there's a question coming up, isn't there, about what schools can do, I think.
Well, first I was going to ask, what are some issues that you often see for teachers in your clinical duties?
Teachers specifically, it's hard to say. Within the age bracket, for sure, anxiety and depression, for sure. Everyone's going to have physical ailments, typically trauma related, and it's hard to categorize. People have accidents all of the time, and I can't possibly comment on that. But for sure, within that age demographic and how society works at the moment, we see a lot of anxiety and depression. I was on GP last week, and I think it was Tuesday, and I signed off around 25 sick notes alone for anxiety and depression in one day, and it wasn't even 5 o'clock. So that was all within the age bracket of 21 to 45.
Right.
Which is typically, I imagine, what teachers' age, what teachers, how old they are. So yeah, that's probably the most common presentation that we get. There's a big rise in stress recently, but we can't really tell if it's increased. We can't tell if the actual people's lives are more stressful. Taking COVID aside, if we look over the past 10 years, it's hard to say whether people's lives are more stressful now, or there's just greater awareness of the actual underpinning issues. So, it wouldn't be fair for me to comment on that. But, anxiety and depression, sure, they are, very rife at the moment, and COVID certainly hasn't helped.
No.
People can't socialize with friends, and what you see is that people have these coping mechanisms that they use at home, which they can't normally use. If they're stressed at work, they might go to the pub with the mate for 2 pints, say, and that social interaction, which can't happen, as an example, will have an impact on that person. So, we are seeing more burnout. People are probably getting fed up of being on these things, being on Zooms. But yeah, there's lots of different kinds of burnout that we're seeing. But yeah, anxiety, depression, burnout. It's hard to say on stress, to be honest.
So what other simple steps can teachers and school leaders take to look after themselves?
Get some good sleep, drink some water, meal prep, support those people around you, come from a collaborative approach rather than competitive approach, especially in the school environment. Help each other, build strong relationships, understand what things are good for you, and do those things. We do a piece of work all the time, which is around, essentially it's around motivation, and why is it that people can't do a certain thing. Like, why is it they're lacking the motivation to do X? And a lot of the time is they're looking in the wrong places. We're looking for some kind of, we're humans, so we're very like emotionally driven. And I know society tries to like pull that out of us as much as possible, but we are emotionally driven things. And in order to do X, we look inside, we look for a feeling to do that thing. So you might be there thinking, oh, I'm tired, or oh, I can't be bothered, or, you'll be sat there thinking, I just don't want to do that thing. So that's what's called the inside out. We're looking for something inside us to go and do that approach. We do that thing. We flip that on its head and we say the approach we need to take is the outside in approach. And again, it comes back to scheduling, where you'll set yourself these tasks throughout the day, and assign it to a time. It has to be assigned to a time, otherwise it won't happen, because you think, oh, I'll do it later. But as soon as it's that time, there's your task, because you'll set those tasks which are good for you. You build them into your schedule, you build them into your routine, so you have the time to do them because you've done it yourself. Okay, at 7:30 at night, I'm going to go walk my dog, or and you're building. We start with 3. So in the first week, we look over a week and say, what 3 things can we do every single day into our routine, which we know will be good for us? You do those 3 things every single day. And then in week 2, we add in 2 more. And then in week 3, we add in another 2. And you can quickly see that, by week 4 or 5, you've got a day full of really healthy activities, and it's things which are very good for you. So those things would typically sit within the 8 core life elements that we talked around before. Fitness, diet, nutrition, helping others. So yeah, I mean, it's really about just being organized and using the right tools and methods to maintain that healthy lifestyle. And it's work that we just don't do with people. I don't know why we don't do it. We should be actually doing these things in schools, and we should actually have a grassroots approach to this, teaching the kids, because how much, Good Enough Parenting is a book. I can't remember who wrote it. I think it was Good Enough Parenting was the book. And it was about just no parent's going to treat the kid in the same way. And it would be, you don't know how much work's gone into actually maintaining that stable lifestyle for the child. Right. And it'd be great for the schools to actually take on these principles and say, look, this is what we should be doing. Are you factoring it into your day? Because otherwise the kids don't know. They don't have a clue. Some kids baseline, we see this in GP. Some kids come in and they're so obese. We had an 8-year-old who was 63 kilos. And it's like, but that was the norm at home for them. It was normal for them to have, 3 massive meals a day and snack throughout the day. We have a huge junk food cupboard, and that's just normal, because that's the way you're brought up, and you don't think different of it. So it'd be great to see the school incorporate these kinds of that. For example, that one thing we just talked about, the outside in approach. It'd be fantastic to see that in schools with a grassroots approach, because the long-term effects that has on kids' development is, arguably huge. So, but of course that needs to come from the top down, doesn't it? And we need to be doing those things ourselves before we distill it into. So, yeah. I mean, we could talk about this for hours. That's just one example of things that people can do.
Okay, great. So how important? Well, you kind of touched on it there about implementing these things ourselves. So how important is it for leaders in schools to look after themselves and model positive self-care openly? So do you think it should be down to the leaders to kind of portray this lifestyle?
It's difficult, isn't it? It's really difficult. I mean, ideally, yes, of course. Your leaders, you would like to think would be a role model to some description. But to actually engaging with a healthy lifestyle is not easy. It's not, when people talk about lifestyle medicine, people think, oh, can you give me a tablet which will do my exercise for me, or cook me all my healthy food, or drink all this water for me? It's like, no, like you've got to go do those things. So there's a huge amount of personal responsibility to actually do those things. And one thing I really, this isn't evidence-based anything at all. This is just a personal view that I really don't like the way society's moving, where all of the emphasis is on big corporate structures to bring in these new healthy paradigms, because actually the individual has so much power over their own health. Unless they're taking their responsibility to optimize their health, then we could have so many policies and procedures, but it won't get better. Now, of course, we need to have appropriate working environments, and health and safety helps with that. Working procedure helps with that. The school can do a lot. The marking children's homework outside of school hours is something that we should not do, for example.
Yeah.
But there's two sides to the coin, of course. But one thing I don't like in society is that actually people aren't taking the personal responsibility that they should to look after their health. It's like, oh, well, we've got the NHS, that they're the ones looking after me. And it's like, well, we need to, as individuals, take small steps regularly every day to live the healthy lifestyle. So coming back to the question is, it's really hard. It's really hard to maintain a healthy lifestyle over a long period of time, because you've got to constantly chip away at it. And yeah, of course, it would be nice for leaders to demonstrate this lifestyle to us, but by no means an easy thing at all. And another part of the question was about, was it positive self-change? Was that the phrasing?
Yeah, model positive self-care.
Self-care, yeah, positive self-care. I think this is actually a massive point. It's around understanding that not everything needs to be positive. Life a lot of the time is really, really bad. And that's normal. Why is everything got to be positive? Things are difficult. People die. You will get health problems. You might fall off the curb and injure your leg. Your uncle might die. Terrible things happen. We're surrounded by absolute chaos within the world. It is a dog eat dog world. We're surrounded by things dying all of the time and terrible things happening. And we have to try and balance that, order and chaos. We need to try and the yin and yang. We need to try and balance that chaos with a little bit of order. But now I think talking about positivity all the time isn't necessarily the best thing, because
toxic. Can be almost toxic.
Yeah, because people need to understand that life is bloody difficult. So engaging with your emotions, if something crap's happened, cry about it. It's an emotion. Like, if you're angry in society, okay, don't hurt people, because obviously that's a terrible thing. But if you're angry, let yourself be angry. There's nothing wrong with being angry. It's a human emotion. If you start bottling these things up and behaving along this like societal normal plane, if you like, then it's just not good for you. So engage with your emotions. When you're happy and you do feel happy, then that's great, and you'll enjoy it even more. But if you're sad, if you're down, if you're angry, have a cry. Go and release some anger. Like, it's fine. We all have emotions. Yeah,
shouldn't suppress them.
No.
Great. So can you think of practical advice for schools to take to help limit preventable absence in teaching staff? For example, how can schools reduce high levels of stress for teachers?
Okay. We touched on a couple before, didn't we, around the marking. I can't imagine how difficult it will be to manage a classroom of 30 kids. Don't envy them at all. Fair play. I have no advice for that at all, because I've never been in the situation. So apologies. But no, look, let's focus on stress there, because it's a point. Some stress is good. People talk about Oh, I don't like being stressed. We need stress in the body. Um, if you go away and have a look at the stress performance curve, in order to work effectively, we have to be stressed to a certain level. What we see in workplaces is that um, people aren't used to being stressed. So they're in a job role which maybe they're in work for, I'm not saying this is for teachers, by the way.
Mhm.
I'm just talking globally across populations. They might be in work from 9 to 5. There's, let's say 7 hours work there with the lunch hour taken out. They might only do 2 to 3 hours work within that period because of lost time. They might be chatting to somebody over the office desk. They might be, well, especially now over Zoom, they've probably got the legs up watching Netflix. They might be making coffees. They might be on the phone, social media. There's so many distractions in the workplace
Mhm.
that actually when a deadline's set and they have to work to that, they think, oh God, this is so stressful. And then people go off, because we see this all the time. People coming in and we talk around the stresses, and actually they should be able to manage that stress.
Mhm.
Um, Provided the right workplace support is in place, like we said, the two sides of the coin, as long as that's there. But those people genuinely aren't used to a level of stress to
Mhm.
make them perform. We have to be
Right.
stressed to push us up this curve so that our performance goes up. It happens in hospital. If I've got two patients to see, I'm going to be slow because it's like, oh, I've not got that much work. It's fine. I'll just take
Mhm.
my time with these patients as long as they're not dying, of course. Like,
Mm.
if they're dying, I'd be slightly more stressed along that curve. But if it was just like prescribing regular medications,
Mm.
or if I was just doing like the mundane tasks, like signing off discharge paperwork or something, I'll take my time with it because there's no pressure there. If you've got 15 patients who are all kicking off, you're like, "Bah!" And you're like
Yeah.
smashing through the work, and you absolutely, and you're pushed along this curve, and you become
Mhm.
so efficient at cracking
Yeah.
out that work. So I think like, but that's good. When we look at brain activity, you enter something called like a flow state.
Right.
And when you pushed up the stress curve, your brain literally fires so much faster than it would in the lower states. So a certain degree of stress is really good for team productivity and to actually
Mhm.
get tasks done. And you have no idea how efficient people can become if they're stressed appropriately. And it's
Yeah.
good as long as you can turn those switches off when you get home and unwind.
Mhm.
But when you're in work, you work. But I
Mhm.
think the society that we live in at the moment is kind of, people don't want any stress.
Mhm.
People are like, oh, I can't deal with this workplace stress. It's like, well, I'm sorry. We need to have stress.
Yeah.
We need to have,
It's a
and
motivator.
of course, yeah, and it makes us way more effective. If you look at professional sports people,
Mhm.
um, F1 drivers, football players, professional hockey players, they're in flow states when they're playing that sport. Nothing else matters to them in that moment because they're so focused on a particular task, and that they're pushed up that stress curve. That their brain's working effectively and efficiently, and you only have to look at people at the top of the game to see that the effect that can have on their performance.
Mhm.
um, but generally for teachers, it's really hard for me to say because I don't know the job well enough to
Yeah.
say what all of the individual stresses are. I could have a good guess and say managing a classroom of 30 kids is probably awful. Parents' evening and having teachers shouting at you is probably awful.
Mm.
Um, Having your head teacher say that lesson was crap, you need to do better. There's all of those things aren't particularly nice.
Mhm.
Um, but equally, if you have a supportive team around you and you're like, okay, how do we address those issues? How do we get through it? There's always going to be
Mhm.
work-life stresses, of course. And it's about working with those around you to mitigate
Mhm.
the way it makes you feel. And if you do feel crap, then say, I don't like this situation. Um, and communicate appropriately with the team. If something is particularly worrying you and it is stressing you out, say it and raise it and be like, how can we address this problem? But to have no stress in a work environment isn't realistic. So I think
Mhm.
it's about pushing people up that curve, but then the other side of the curve is really dangerous. If we go, it's kind of like a bell curve. So you get pushed up the bell, and at the top, you're working really effectively. If you get pushed too far, you're dropping off the end, and you hit burnout. You're not working effectively. So, you know, it can go too far. So it's about putting the right things in place to make sure people are working in this nice window. But, you know, having some stress there is definitely a good thing. It's about bringing that top end down to make sure that we safeguard the people.
Oh, it's great. It's really informative. Didn't know that. So we touched on this a little bit earlier, but how did the pandemic impact you?
Personally?
Yeah.
I mean, it was quite nice in the sense that I could still go to work. You know, I was, although PPE wasn't great at the time, we could still actually go to work and see people. So my social isolation wasn't as bad as what I've heard reports of elsewhere. But look, the NHS is at full capacity all the time. You know, we've had on Monday, I was in A&E Monday, we had 250 admissions, and it wasn't even when I left at 5 o'clock on Monday, there was 250 admissions from midnight the night before till 5 o'clock, which is crazy. 250. You know, our hospital's got near on 1,000 beds, just over 1,000 beds. What do we do with 250 new people? We can't just ship the others off, you know? So the NHS is at full capacity all the time. COVID actually scared a lot of the people coming into A&E off.
Oh, right.
So, you know, I was telling you before we started this recording that we had a guy who put his hand on the wall, and then when he was drilling, all of his knuckles got caught in the drill bit, and he dislocated these three fingers, all of the knuckles here. You know, that we saw much less of that because people were at home, typically not doing as many stupid things. You know, so many times we see people coming in, you know, we get 45-year-old women who got absolutely leathered on a Thursday evening, and then they slipped down the slope in the garden and dislocated the shoulder or something. You know, it's something that we see all of the time, and that was happening less because people were generally doing less activities. So, you know, there were less accidents, less RTAs. One of the other things was that people were actually scared to go into the departments. So, you know, one of our most common presentations is chest pain, typically indicative of angina or a heart attack. And people would have, you know, say a 75-year-old gentleman sat at home, he might have chest pain but not come to hospital for it, when actually he's just had a heart attack and he needs treating for it, you know. So we've seen a lot more deaths at home as a result, and a lot less presentations coming to A&E with COVID. So many things changed with COVID because that dynamic was kind of going on. So we actually had less people in the hospital, but then the people who were in hospital needed higher supportive care. So, you know, they might need a ventilator, they might need tubing, they might need what's called CPAP. All of those interventions require certain facilities, and we don't have the 1,000 beds that we mentioned earlier. We don't have 1,000 beds with CPAP on. You know, we might have 30. So, you know, quickly when you're getting loads of COVID admissions who all need CPAP, you can't manage that. And then one of the other stresses was the staff were off. You know, some staff were scared of COVID, so they wouldn't come in. You know, the own work life, the work life pressures there. People were staying at home. They're saying, you know, I don't want to come into work because I need a shield. I live with my 93-year-old dad who can't afford to get COVID. There was no vaccines. There was no PPE. So the workforce was down. And then people were actually off sick with COVID. You know, a lot of young doctors house share. So I live with Toby and a lady called Nikki. You know, if I got COVID, those two would have to self-isolate as well. So then we're two staff down. And then if PPE was not great back in the day, unless you've adhered to every PPE policy, those people who came into contact doing work would have to then self-isolate. So it became a nightmare, to be honest. We had like no staff at times. And then, you know, phlebotomists, for example, would come round in the morning and take bloods off the patients. And most patients get bloods most days. So say let's take one ward. If you have 30 patients on that ward, phlebotomist comes round, takes 30 patients' bloods, which is great, and where they're working away. The phlebotomy team, I think they were down to 2 staff for the entire hospital. You can't expect 2 people to take 1,000 people's bloods. So,
Right, yeah.
they were saying, we'll come onto the ward and we'll do 4 of your patients out of the 30. So straight away, you're like, got 26 patients to bleed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got 26 patients to bleed now, and I've got all the other jobs to do. So straight away, you're 2.5, 3 hours behind where you would be. And then, there's other doctors. Oh, it was crazy. That was probably one of the worst aspects, just having no staff. COVID itself is a relatively simple treatment pathway, and you can't do too much for it. It's not like a heart attack. We've used that example earlier today, where there's lots of different steps to it, and there's lots of different interventions that we could potentially do depending on scan results. COVID, we do a chest X-ray, we have a look at how bad they are, we put a ceiling of care in place, and we start them on this pathway. So once they're on that, we titrate them up and down this pathway up to their ceiling of care. So there isn't too much that we do for the patients. So that side of things was all right. It was mainly around our own staffing, to be honest. And we're in the PPE all day sucks. It's not pleasant. We had a hot summer last summer, and the wards were 28, 29, sometimes above 30 degrees. And when you've got the full boiler suits on, your whole back is just drenched with sweat all day, and you'd be constantly drinking water, constantly decontaminating your face. It was horrible working environments. But no, it sounds ridiculous, but I really enjoyed it, because it was just kind of, it was an experience, and I've learned a lot from it. And I wouldn't change anything. The good and the bad, it all teaches you things. So there's obviously days which were terrible, absolutely terrible, and maybe for about 3-4 weeks I went through massive burnout myself, but I reflected through that process, and really focused down on my routine, scheduling. I journaled, tried to put as much order in my life to combat that chaos. But no, I wouldn't change a thing. It was really, really interesting time. I start ITU next week. So, that rota is...
What does that, what's ITU?
Intensive care, sorry.
Intensive care.
Yeah, or intensive therapy unit. And intensive care unit, they all mean the same thing. So start that on Wednesday next week.
Exciting.
It is, I'm looking forward to it. The rota's chaos. Our max shift length is 25 hours, which I'm not sure how that's possible.
What, one shift?
Surely not. 25 hours, yeah.
Gosh. Well, that kind of leads on to the next question. Tell us a day in the life of Dr.
Ed. Honestly, I couldn't tell you. I just couldn't. Every day is so different. Just one thing that I always take forward is maintaining flexibility. It's nice to try and build as much routine as possible, but you've got to maintain some kind of flexibility. So, today on this call with you, got another one at 1:00 with the Business Improvement District. So that'll be a really good session about improving wellbeing and mental health for the corporates. And then I start my A&E shift at around 3:00 today. It says 2, but we've managed to wangle something because I was on this mental health call from 1. So I'm doing 3 till 1:00 in the morning, and then I'll come home, probably go straight to bed. I need to get some physio in, get some exercise in. And then tomorrow we're doing a 4:00 till 2:00 in the morning. Got a lovely weekend off, and then back on it next week. So I don't know. It's just every day is very different. You don't know where you're going to be placed. So say if you work on A&E, which I'm on this week, Once you're in the department, they'll say, here's the demand, and they'll just push. Within A&E, you've got lots of different sectors. You might have majors, you might have resuscitation, where the sickest patients are who are maybe going to die. You might have minors. You've got something called SDEC, which is same day emergency care. So there's lots of different areas, and you've got to just be flexible. And
which is your favorite?
Definitely resus. Definitely resus. It's so cool. I can't tell you how cool it is. You mentioned 24 hours in A&E. That is what it's like. It's just absolute chaos. We had a woman, I was telling you before we started recording, who had the, if you imagine the heart is a balloon, if you put that balloon within another balloon and then fill between the balloons, that's what was happening to her heart. So the outside balloon was compressing the inner balloon, the heart. It was compressing it and stopping her heart from functioning. So we had that on Monday. It was a really interesting case. 71-year-old lady, previously fit and well, sat at home. Her husband had gone upstairs to bed, and then he came down an hour later to find her on the floor, because he was like, oh, why hasn't she come upstairs? And she was, she was on the floor, passed out. Called the ambulance. We brought her in. The ambulance did some basic resuscitation care on the way, and then when we got her in, she was breathing herself. Heart rate was a little bit high, but we could tell that she was unwell because her heart was getting compressed so much. It's called a pericardial effusion. Peri meaning around, cardial heart. So peri, around heart, and effusion is just like fluid. So pericardial effusion, her heart was getting compressed, so she couldn't put out enough blood to meet her demands to support the body to survive. And because it's like a one-way system, blood was going in and filling this sac and compressing the heart even more, and nothing could come out. So yeah, she was just becoming more and more unwell. And then we're trying to work. Obviously, you can't just you can't spot diagnose that the heart's within there. So we're trying to work out what's going on with this woman. And the consultant's got the ultrasound machine on her chest, and then actually found out that it'd been a long-standing issue, but she'd coped with it. The body adapts slightly. You can adjust your blood pressure, or you can adjust your heart rate depending on what your needs are. But it'd been a long-standing issue that it had formed a clot around the heart. So she had a 28 millimeter clot pressing on the heart, and then there was a 7 millimeter fresh blood pressing it even further. So the whole thing was getting compressed quite a lot. And yeah, unfortunately, she died. But that whole process is just fascinating, so interesting.
Yeah. So how's that caused?
Typically, it's going to be something like traumatic or an infective cause, or you've got a lining around the outside of the heart. You've got linings throughout the body. You've got one around your lungs as well. It can happen in the lungs, where you get like fluid within the lining and between the actual lung itself, and it builds up. Same thing happened here in the heart. Your body just puts these thin membranes around the organs to try and protect them in some way. But if there's a slight defect in that thing, then you can get fluid or blood or whatever within that. So yeah, typically you've got to try and get that fluid off as soon as possible, puncture it and get it out. Yeah, unfortunately she died.
Well, I suppose you're working at that good stress level, aren't you, when you're in that? Was that resus, you said?
That's resus, yeah. Yeah, I mean, so that was relatively stressful, but resus is quite nice because there's only 7 beds, so you're never slammed with patients. You never got like, you go into normal A&E and it's just like bedlam. It's like sometimes you look at the corridors and you think, what is happening? So yeah, resus is a relatively controlled environment. Our resus only has 7 beds, and one of them's always kept. We've got a trauma bed, which you always try and keep free in case, you know, you never know what's going to happen outside in the world. If someone has a massive like traffic accident, then we got to keep that open to get somebody in. So yeah, it is. It's a privilege to work there, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. So have you got any parting thoughts?
For teachers, for schools?
Yeah, for teachers, for our watchers.
Create a routine, drink some water, stress yourself to a certain level, communicate with your team well. If you're feeling a certain way, you know, tell them. There's no shame in it. You know, showing your emotional range is a strength. It's not something which comes easily. But, you know, saying that I feel upset about this, or I'm sad about X, you know, that is certainly showing your vulnerabilities as a strength. So communicating well with your team. Yeah, putting as many things as you can into order. But there's a guy called Jordan Peterson, and he's been in the news for some controversial things. But he's a very intellectual guy. He's a Canadian clinical psychologist, and he talks about having one foot firmly planted into your order and then the other foot into chaos. So embracing both of those things, doing what you can to build order, but also understanding that there's going to be a lot of crap coming your way, and understanding that sometimes you can't control the crap that comes your way. You've just got to kind of accept that it will come. But you know, you've got all of these things in order to try and mitigate that to some description. So yeah, just do what you can and accept that things will be difficult. So yeah, that was kind of broad general advice, but yeah.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for your time today. Really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Thanks.